I did all the preparation. I had trained and trained and trained and paid a lot of dues and taken a lot of classes and really tried to learn the discipline of sketch, improvisational, but really kind of drill down and be a bit of a student of comedy and about how to prepare and how to create an environment and a world, for this character and all the stuff that always sounds so blowhardy. But I had really technically understood it, so like I wasn't a street fighter. I was a disciplined martial artist, who was now going to take that into the streets, but I was going to use all my techniques.
Welcome to Second Act Stories, a podcast that profiles people who have made major life and career changes and are pursuing more rewarding lives in a second act. I'm your host, Scott Merritt.
And I'm Andy Levine, Scott's co-host of the Second Act Stories podcast. Scott, today you flew out to Los Angeles. You went to the studios of Adam Carolla, a former carpenter turned podcaster who actually built his own studio with his own hands.
Yeah, and he calls that studio the Pirate Ship. That's where I had the pleasure to interview him. Before he became the Podfather, Adam hosted a syndicated radio show called Loveline with Dr. Drew. He also had a syndicated #1 morning radio show. He's written and produced several comedy and documentary films, and he even holds the Guinness World Record for the most downloaded podcast.
Scott, as I gather, this is a story about a guy who didn't have a lot of support to follow his passion, but he found his way in spite of that.
Yeah, Andy, this is just a story of a guy who made it through pure hustle. And as successful as he's become, he's just as humble. So since he's a legendary comedian, we kicked off talking about whether he comes from a funny family.
No, my mom, let's see. Let's see if I can figure this one out. My dad had a sense of humor. He had some aspirations about maybe doing some comedy or some radio, played the trumpet a little bit, had like some sort of minor showbiz kind of thoughts. I don't think what he understood about comedy or show business in general is the work that it takes. I think a lot of people think it's who you know and you show up and you get discovered at sitting at the counter of Schwab's or something, and don't really realize that if you want to do comedy, that means a lot of groundlings classes and waiting in line for open mic nights and not getting paid and writing stuff down and sort of working for free. And he just never wanted to do that part of it. I don't know if you asked him like why, if he would come up with an answer, but most of the people that aren't really successful in these loftier endeavors, they say, they sort of talk about the system, but it's really about them just not putting in their 10,000 hours, My mom has no sense of humor. She's probably, but not because she's a serious person. There's some people that guy's a college professor. He's very serious, It's not that. She just has had a bummer of a personality that was a little dour, a little depressed, and a little kind of woe is me. And she also didn't like whatever, in humor, there needs to be an element of you have to kind of stereotype. You have to go, oh, how come every time I'm running late to work, I get behind some Asian woman on the freeway and we're going 10 miles an hour? She would go like, not all Asian women are so. She was that kind of person. Right. So it's like, you really think about a joke or the genesis of a joke. It's like you going, how come every time I'm looking for can't find my keys, it's only when I'm running late? And she'll go, not every time, So she was kind of the enemy of comedy.
I got the feeling that in Adam's case, a sense of humor wasn't hereditary.
I don't know if there's a genetic component. It wasn't an environmental component. It's not like we all sat around and laughed and, put on, you'd hear these stories where like Billy Crystal would say, oh, when I was a young boy, all the aunts and uncles would come over for Thanksgiving and they'd have some drinks and then I'd come out and perform and they'd all give me money and laugh. Like it wasn't that. It was just kind of, if you're funny, you're funny. And if you're not, you're not. But either way, just sort of take it outside. It wasn't really promoted or discussed, but I had a sense of humor, like people like working with animals or have a sense for building or mechanics or just language. Some people take to things early. I was kind of that way with comedy, but it wasn't a thing.
Was your family good with providing discipline or a path or laying things out for you about what could possibly happen in the future?
No. No. I was just left on my own. I just did what I wanted. It was sort of like we had a kind of a tacit agreement, which is, look, we're not going to ask a lot of questions. We're not going to insist. We don't really need to see your report card, and we don't need to have parents teachers conferences, and we're just not going to get that involved. On the other hand, you're not really going to have curfews or rules. Like, we're not going to be hypocrites. We're not going to say we're really involved with this and then we don't make dinner for you. It's just more like you're on your own for dinner, and if you get an F, you get an F. Like, you settle it. I played a lot of sports. I played a lot of football. Football was really hard. It was really hot. It was really discipline-oriented back then. And it is now, but it was really militaristic back then. And so I kind of got used to guys in windbreakers like yelling at me and telling me, my last easy day was yesterday and, stuff like that. And just running laps and running wind sprints and gassers and stuff. I just got beat up and kind of worked, So I had low self-esteem and I was just like, look, really all you really have. I mean, a lot of my discipline was probably environmental, like, how did you have the discipline to dig ditches for 10 hours a day in the heat? And the answer is, I had no money, I had no job. And nobody else in my family had any money either. So is that discipline? Is it desperation? When you fall off the back of a cruise ship, how much discipline do you have to tread water? Or are you just trying to keep your head above water? So, and there was a combination of learning discipline and then just a kind of desperation.
So that brings us to graduating high school, and you said you started digging ditches, and I think you cleaned carpets, and you had a bunch of random odd jobs, and you found your way to carpentry, and you became a boxing instructor. Was there any one of those things that stood out as probably your career path?
Construction, carpentry seemed like a path for me. It seemed like if I could learn the skill of carpentry, buy some tools and get a truck, I could have a job. I could employ myself. I could be employed by somebody else. Like I had this, I guess, this sort of creeping thought that if I had a truck with a bed box and some tools in it, I could always get paid somehow. I wouldn't call it a career. You're not going to get rich. There's no benefits, but you could survive off the skill of carpentry.
There was always a through line, though, in your life with comedy. So you were class clown.
Mm-hmm.
You took yourself to the Groundlings, which seems like something that I would never do because I wouldn't think of it.
I was told to go there, but I thought to ask. I knew a creative family. They lived in the hills. They were Jewish. The father was like the music director for the Academy Awards. The mother seemed to be into plays and sketches and, God knows what. And they were like the creative family. So I did go to Daniel Chaikin's parents and kind of go, you guys, first off, you live in a nice house and you seem to be creative and stuff, but what would you do? Like, where would you go? And so she said, go to the Groundlings.
How important was that direction in what ultimately happened for you?
It's hard to put a number on it. I was until then, just kind of growing up with kind of like-minded clods in the valley, just hanging out and, getting into trouble and just doing dudes, football team dude stuff, And when I went to the Groundlings, I went to a Groundlings show, and I just remember sort of sitting there going, wow, there's people that are doing something else, that don't involve, riding around in the back of a pickup truck or climbing fences, getting into fights and stuff, like drinking beer at the park. Like, this is like a thing where they're being creative and it seems funny. And I kind of had these could be my people. Like, I think I would fit in here with this. I'm not like them. They're college educated and not so blue collar, but I think we'd have a lot of the same ideas, and maybe this could be a people that I could hang out with.
Yeah. How much did that matter that they went to college and you didn't?
It didn't make a big difference. It only made a kind of a practical difference in that their vocabulary was much more vast than mine, and they understood references, and they had read Shakespearean plays, and they had an education, and a lot of them had a theater education. So they knew what upstage and downstage and stage left. The director would go, all right, everyone, come up stage, and I'd start moving the other direction, or go, so stage, Adam, stage left. I'm going, you're left? No, stage left. Like, I didn't know where things were or how things worked, or Shakespearean plays. They'd say, let's do an improv based on a Shakespeare play, And I was like, I've never read one, So I'd have to kind of fake it and hang out.
Got it. So all this time you're now building a career, working in carpentry. You've got this comedy stuff that's kind of feeding your soul, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, I never think in the sort of lofty thoughts like that, but I was getting something out of comedy that I had not formerly got out of football and carpentry and baseball and carpet cleaning and hanging out with my Valley dude friends. I felt like this is something, and it is feeding me, and I'm there's some thing that it's nurturing, or I'm being recognized for being funny, for saying funny things, and people are laughing, and there seems to be maybe your sense of humor has some currency versus zero currency from where I was from.
Did you have a goal ultimately worked out in your mind about that you wanted to work in entertainment, you wanted to work in comedy?
I didn't have a goal. I was pretty deficient in spelling and reading and writings, and I never thought of myself as a kind of in front of the camera, kind of leading man kind of person. I never really thought of myself as like, I'm going to have a sitcom and it's going to be named Adam. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I went about my life. So I didn't have any grandiose thoughts or otherwise. I was just sort of like, well, you're going to have a hard time writing and reading, so my spelling might be hard to write comedy, like work in a writer's room. But maybe you can share your ideas and just be sort of a part of a group, collaborate with people. And I don't know if you get paid or not.
They say, luck is where preparation meets opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels a lot like all of this preparation was happening, even though you didn't necessarily have a direction for that preparation. And it kind of came to a head when you famously connected with Jimmy Kimmel.
Mm-hmm. I did all the preparation. I had trained and trained and trained and paid a lot of dues and taken a lot of classes and really tried to learn the discipline of sketch, improvisational, but really kind of drill down and be a bit of a student of comedy and about how to prepare and how to create an environment and a world, for this character and all the stuff that always sounds so blowhardy. But I had really technically understood it, so like I wasn't a street fighter. I was a disciplined martial artist, who was now going to take that into the streets, but I was going to use all my techniques. And so I had all these techniques. And so, when I met Jimmy, I think Jimmy's first he thought I was a boxing coach, which I was, but I think his first impression of me was like, how's this guy so skilled and so funny? It's not, it sort of transcended he's a knock around guy, so he's funny, have a drink, tell a joke. He could see that I was skilled, but I don't think he was aware of where it came from, because I was a Carpenter boxing coach, So I did immediately take all of the skill set that I'd worked on for so many years and just translated it into radio.
And it was the opportunity that came about because you seized something that you heard, right? You heard that he was going to have a boxing match, and you seized that opportunity by just showing up. Yeah.
Showing up at the radio station and trying to get the job as the boxing coach, which wasn't a job, but it didn't pay. But I really wanted in on this event, and I didn't care if I trained Jimmy or the other guy. I didn't know either one of them.
Not being paid is a really interesting point, though, because the path to success kind of comes in the form of just being where you need to be and following an opportunity that you recognize as an opportunity, tuning into it. Mm-hmm. And so how much of, well, let's talk about your path in general in relation to that. How much of your path was sort of revealed as you walked it?
I would say all of it. I didn't have any preconceived notions of anything. I had a kind of a general universal trust of, you just kind of get up and you just kind of go to work and you trust your instincts. And if something seems like an opportunity, you should go at it, even if others may not recognize it as an opportunity. If you sort of feel like, I think there's something here, do it. You know what I mean? Like go at it.
Yeah.
And then it'll just unfold as it unfolds. Maybe you'll do this, and maybe you'll do that, and maybe this guy will be your partner, maybe that guy will be your partner. But there's a kind of the universe isn't fair, and it's not unfair. It doesn't really have favorites, and it doesn't really discriminate. It's just get out there, make your own luck. Just get to work.
Right.
That's all I kind of, that was my only approach. I probably intentionally didn't think a lot about goals. I really didn't have goals. The goals was to engage.
I asked Adam about the moment when comedy started paying him actual money.
I was paid at the beginning in comedy very kind of piecemeally. I got $50 a bit on Kevin and Bean. Maybe I'd do 3 or 4 bits, maybe 3 bits a week. Then there was like Comedy Dynamics. No, it wasn't Comedy Dynamics. It was some other syndicated company that would buy my characters' bits. I think they'd pay me maybe $80 or $90 for a bit and have to go record those bits, Mm-hmm. And so $50 here and $80 there, and I would do a few of those a week for the comedy syndicator, and so maybe I would, have $300 or $350 a week, from doing comedy. It wasn't quite enough to quit the boxing job or the carpentry job, but it as comedy started taking up a greater percentage of my income, $50 at a time, but it would be like one less carpentry job I would do that week, and it was that kind of stuff.
So there had to be a moment when you finally made enough to say, okay, I'm no longer a carpenter. Now I'm working in entertainment. Was there like a magic flashpoint where that happened?
No, what ended up happening is I started doing some carpentry for the radio station. I rebuilt the studio and did the jocks' lockers and stuff like that. I made that stuff. And then I went over to Kevin and Bean's house and built him a lot of stuff like over at his house. And I kind of found myself doing comedy and then working, doing a little carpentry for the people that were at the station and that kind of stuff. So I was kind of supplementing it that way. And then at a certain point, I guess I began doing Loveline, the radio show. And it was probably at that moment when I started doing that on a nightly basis that I was done with the carpentry and boxing world.
And that all came from little baby steps toward getting that gig. Was Loveline is arguably what put you on the map, right? Was it syndicated when you first started working on it?
The very first night I started was the very first night they syndicated, and just in one market. So they were in Los Angeles, and then they went to Los Angeles and 91X in San Diego. So it did start. The day I started was sort of the day they started to syndicate.
So you could take credit for making Loveline a big, huge national syndicated success?
I never think that way. I never have any thoughts that way. But yeah, I definitely had something to do with it growing to over 100 stations, I guess. I don't know how many we were on. But yes, I started, and the night I started, we added a station, and we would keep adding stations after that.
Then you have Loveline, the TV show. So now you start getting on-camera experience, and you start putting some of that other prep to work for you. Then the Man Show happens, which I would say is a cultural milestone for comedy.
Thanks.
You're welcome. You did draw negative feedback for it, probably because of the name of the show. I mean, I can't imagine any other reason why people would have said bad things other than they called it the Man Show. How much rejection did you go through, and how did you tune out the naysayers?
I never really tuned in the naysayers, so I never really. I mean, Loveline would take a certain amount of crap, and the Man Show would take a certain amount of crap, and I just assume that's what happens when you talk into a microphone. You get a certain amount of crap. I feel that way today. I felt that way then. It's like, share your opinions, and you'll get crap.
Over the course of this time, Adam got a ton of reps doing radio. This led to regular appearances sitting in on the Howard Stern Show. And when Howard eventually left terrestrial radio, Adam replaced him in a number of West Coast markets. Adam's morning show rose to the top. He got great ratings. And in 2009, it all came to an end. That's when he turned to podcasting, a medium that barely even existed at the time. I asked him how that happened.
I happen to be in this position where a good friend of mine, Bill Simmons, who I'd known for quite some time, we worked together on Jimmy Kimmel show and socialized and things like that. He was doing a podcast. I think it was a kind of ESPN parent company kind of podcast. And he would invite me over to do his podcast, quite frequently. So I would do it. And so I was aware of this thing, this format, this internet thing,
Yeah.
And then I would also get these periodic updates from the people who worked at KLSX, the mother station I was at in Los Angeles. And just sort of apropos of nothing, they would say, you had 19 million minutes of streaming last month, on your show, your radio show. And they'd go, I always remember they'd go, second only to the Fan. The Fan in New York has 22 million, whatever, but you're the second guy. And I'd go, streaming. And they'd go, yeah. And I'd go, what does that really mean? And they'd go, well, it's people, they're not listening on the radio, but they're listening on their computer. They're streaming the show.
Right.
And I remember kind of going, man, 19 million minutes of streaming. That's sounds good. And the sales guys would go like, no, it's not. It's neither, it's neither here nor there. And I was like, but all those minutes of streaming, that's got to be, good for something, right? And they were like, you can't sell advertising to those people. We don't even know what it is. But I remember going, Jesus, if people are doing 19 million minutes of streaming every month, it's got to be worth something. And so that was kind of the mindset going into podcasting.
How did you know what to do other than just record a show? And, it's very clear. I mean, even I have a podcast. So the barrier to entry for podcasting is you need a microphone. That's it. So how did you know how to navigate that when it just didn't exist before? It was like a wild, wild west.
Well, we had a sort of technical guy who helped me at KLSX named Mike, and Mike could navigate the internet and kind of send me a laundry list of, go down to Guitar Center and get this kind of mic and this kind of mixer and this piece and do that. I mean, obviously the talking part I could handle.
Yeah.
But we would do it with my old high school buddy Donnie, and he would record it, and then he would just send it to Mike, and Mike would like mix it and put it up on the internet.
And then you figured out a way to turn that into, advertising, and suddenly podcasting starts to take off.
Sometimes people say from time to time, well, we looked at Adam and we thought he's doing it right, and I'm flattered. But if I were never born, there'd be plenty of podcasting out there. I'll just look at it that way. What would my grandma say? And the answer would be, you had nothing to do with any of this. So what I did maybe is I did a lot of live podcasting early, like figuring out we can sell a comedy club and do a podcast at a comedy club or theater. That was something I was in on kind of early. And also just sort of the model in terms of get listeners and then start advertising on your podcast. So I had something to do with the model of that and maybe the live podcasting part.
You had a family. Wasn't there part of you that was concerned about how to pay the mortgage next month?
When I was fired from morning radio, February. I had about 9 months left on my radio contract. So I would get paid for the following 9 months. So I was sort of like, well, I think you could probably do this for 9 months. You have 9 months. You'll get paid. You can pay the mortgage. You keep the lights on, pay for bandwidth, which was expensive back then. Mm-hmm. It's probably it would cost me $10,000 a month, oftentimes, as I think about it. You got 9 months. So that's what I did. Within 9 months, it became clear that there was enough that could be generated from doing this. Sometimes maybe it's just live shows or live appearances or something. There was ways to get paid. I think there was some very faint roadmap that had sort of appeared.
What's the biggest chance that you've taken to reach the next level in any part of your life?
I never really distill it down to taking chances. It's betting on yourself and taking chances are kind of the same to me. It was never a chance to bet on yourself. For me, it was like, you've got the goods, go ahead and convince everybody that you have the goods, but that'll be your job. I never looked at sort of endeavors. There's things I've been involved with, things I've turned my back on or what have you, and many things didn't work out. There's always a ton of things that don't work out, but I never looked at them as not working out. Just like I didn't look at Dancing with the Stars as not working out. I looked at it as an experience.
Yeah, you got something out of it that helped shape you as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really busy with multiple podcasts, and you do stand up all over the country, and you make regular TV appearances, and you race, and you've got all the auto events. How do you stay motivated?
I don't really look at it as motivation. I never looked at when I was a carpenter, it's like, how do you stay motivated? Or how do people who work at the post office, how do you motivate? It's like, I got a job, I get up and I do it. And that's the motivation. I don't really, I enjoy a variety of endeavors. I usually, people get something on the calendar a few months down the road, and I go, yeah, let's do it. And then at some point, the day is upon us,
Right.
and then it's time to do it. But I don't really look at it as motivation. I just look at it as this: you made a commitment to go do this thing, and now it's time to do it.
You're most well known for comedy, but you also have an incredibly well-tuned curiosity that makes your non-comedic interviews spectacularly interesting.
Thanks.
Were you always naturally curious?
I was. I always was naturally curious. Probably when I was younger, it was probably sort of mechanical. I want to know how things work physically.
Yeah.
Later on, it started to give way to a kind of an emotional curiosity, a psychological curiosity. But I always wanted to know how things worked and like what motivated people and why people would do things and why I might be motivated by X, Y, or Z.
You have testified in front of Congress.
Mm-hmm.
You dismantled Gavin Newsom in amazing fashion.
Yes.
I listen to that at least once a month.
Well, to be fair, when people go, "Oh, you're a good arguer," it's like, no, he's an idiot, and he's trying to put points forward that are idiotic. So I'm not a master debater. He's an idiot.
Right. Well,
so he's easy to dismantle.
It was, maybe he was easy prey, but it was interesting radio. Mm-hmm. You've recently partnered with Ben Shapiro on the Daily Wire. What has driven your interest in politics?
I would like to express myself in an unfettered fashion, and I really wanted nothing to do with politics. Like, I was like, the kindly rancher who just wanted to raise his family, and then all of a sudden the Dalton boys came into town, like, I just want to live. I'm not that interested in politics. But then our governor shuts the beaches and shuts the restaurants and shuts the gyms and shuts the schools. And then all of a sudden I'm like the rancher who's got to go get his gun. Now I'm like, oh, I've been drawn into this thing. Like, I don't like insane politics. Like, it's like, I'm not interested in politics per se, but I do live in a place with a crazy homeless community. So when I'm explaining to the would-be governor that these people are high on drugs and they're psychotic, and he's explained to me that it's about a welfare mom, mother of three, who has a minimum wage job, I'm saying, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. And then he's saying, I do know what I talk about. And next thing you know, we're in politics.
Right.
But I wouldn't really want to be in politics. I just want to see if we could fix a homeless problem.
Well, that's just one example of a historic interview that you did. But in general, you definitely have waded into politics more.
Yes.
So what has driven that interest? And are you afraid of being canceled by the Hollywood elites that don't agree with you?
Well, I'm already not in that world, so I don't really. They don't have the ability to cancel me because I'm not in their world. I don't rely on them.
Right.
So they can. It's a lot easier to. it's a lot easier to not give someone a job who you're trying to cancel who wants a job versus me who doesn't want a job. Because if you're not giving me a job and I don't want the job, then am I canceled? You know? So Hollywood will do its best to punish anybody who gets outside the lines with them, which is everybody on all subjects all the time, no matter how crazy it is. And I've just never been interested in playing in that world. And I've also known that I don't think you're going to, your career is not going to be celebrating your 37th year on All My Children. Like, you're not going to get jobs in Hollywood. You're not going to be celebrated that way. You're going to have to go out and sort of turn your own earth and churn and make your own stuff. And that's kind of what I've always known or what I've understood about the business for me.
Which explains why you have your own podcast network and you created your own movies and now you're making documentary films and you're doing your own thing without the benefit of the Hollywood machine.
Yeah, they may be from a kind of ancillary standpoint involved with showing some of the documentaries on Netflix or something like that. But by and large, I'm just not in that system. And I think there's probably more and more comedians especially that have just fallen out of that system. Because the system is too taxing, it's too confining, it's overregulated. It's sort of like California. Like, look at comedy as a small business. You want to set up in Texas or you want to set up in California? Like, there's too many rules. Hollywood has the same thing. They just have rules, a lot of rules about how you can navigate their system, and I've just never been open to navigating that system.
But yet you've been in California your whole life. Mm-hmm. Is there a plan to get out?
Yeah, I think everybody who can get out is going to get out of California.
What about you?
Yes. The answer is yes. Yeah, my kids are in high school. I got to wait for them to graduate and then showing up at their graduation in a U-Haul.
Have you ever been threatened because of your views?
I don't know, because it's not. I mean, the answer is maybe. I don't read everything. I don't pay a close attention to how people process my views. You know, I say things, and a lot of people don't like what I have to say, and then maybe they say something, but once I'm done saying it, I'm sort of done with the process. Not really into the second part of the process. I said things about COVID. I've said things about schools reopening. And then I said if AOC was fat and middle-aged and from Minnesota, no one would listen to what she had to say. And people did a lot of like, you got to take that back. And I'm like, what's untrue about that statement? And when you can point that out to me, then I will take it back.
Right.
So that's, and it's not good or bad. It's people don't like certain things I say. I get it. That's up to them.
Right.
I kind of create the content and then they can do with it what they will.
Do you ever worry about alienating a group of people who became fans because of comedy and who are turned off by more political talk?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And, people say, do say this or don't say that. And I just go, it's what I want to say at the time I want to say it. Just like I used to say whatever I said when I was on Loveline 25 years ago,
Right.
And so for me, it's like I do try to keep an eye on comedy, an emphasis on comedy. But on the other hand, sometimes you can have some important conversations that are devoid of comedy, and sometimes you can have some angry conversations that are devoid of comedy. And, I never really looked at it as do this. I just looked at it as this is what I'm thinking now.
Was your path influenced by your proximity to Hollywood? Or if you lived in Nebraska, would you have been able to or been interested in going into entertainment?
I had a sense of humor in a sort of innate kind of way that I liked listening to Dr. Demento when I was a kid on Sunday nights and playing practical jokes on people and stuff like that. So I had this thing running through me that was just comedy that I'm sure would have bubbled to the surface in any environment. I don't know anybody who's in comedy who is just from here. They all left somewhere to come here. I just happen to be here. So the here can't be creating it. Because if the here created it or fostered it, then any of my million friends from North Hollywood High would also be doing this.
Right. What part of your whole experience in building a successful career in entertainment, what part of it kind of resonates the most as the big lesson that you learned and what to do and how to be successful no matter what you're doing?
The thing that would probably have a universal application is there is no sense of coasting and continuing along in your trajectory while not putting your foot on the accelerator. So, people say to me all the time, well, you got successful because you met Jimmy Kimmel. And it's like, yeah, but we stopped doing shows together 20 years ago. Like, I did meet Jimmy. He did help me. But if I just decided to kind of go, well, screw it, now I know Jimmy, I don't think we'd be having this conversation right now. Like, you have to get up and you have to treat it like a job.
What advice would you give to somebody who is looking to make a career change or thinking about a career change, but is like frozen on the fence and can't just take that leap?
I would say you're not that interested in that career. You say you are. I mean, it could be comedy, could be country music, but if it's in you, it's in you. You don't freeze and don't take the leap. That's a universal thing that affects everybody, and you have to do it. And the ones who do it are that into it, and the ones that, I'd say, like, what would you say about a guy who's single and he wanted to go out whoring, but he just couldn't leave the apartment? I'd go, not that horny.
It was an out-of-body experience being invited to the pirate ship to interview Adam on his turf in his studio. And I'm glad I did it because I got to experience part of the empire Adam built through grit, determination, and good old elbow grease. And it served as a reminder that grit, determination, and elbow grease are three of the primary ingredients for success. Adam is living proof. He didn't have any meaningful support from his parents. Instead, he went out and found the discipline he needed elsewhere. Then his passion drove the rest. Although he didn't have a powerful compass,